For the first time in a long time, we have direct evidence that migrants commit more crime than everyone else.
Is this the best and brightest we've been promised? Welcome to No Border, No Country. We're talking today about crime in the United States committed by people who have entered this country illegally. I'm joined as always by Judge Matt O'Brien. Matt, you had an opinion piece on FoxNews.com this week, co-authored by early senior fellow Tom Homan, and you were talking about this very topic. Give us a little bit of a summary on what you were trying to say there.
Well, for the first time in a long time, we have direct evidence that migrants commit more crime than everyone else. For years, people at places like the Cato Institute and others have insisted somehow that people who are in the United States illegally commit less crime. I think their theory was always these people are trying to fly under the radar, so they want to stay away from the attention of law enforcement. But of course, with the evolution of sanctuary cities and the tolerance that has been shown in the courts and in other parts of the criminal justice system for illegal aliens committing crime, that those arguments just haven't held a lot of water. And so we now have essentially the perfect laboratory experiment to try and test their hypothesis and see if it's true. We have a large number, larger than ever number of migrants who have been admitted to the United States. I should say they've been let in because they haven't been formally admitted. They've been allowed to run roughshod over the border unlawfully, come into the United States, and nobody is enforcing the immigration laws. And what's happening in places like New York City? Crime is through the roof. And we have seen over the last couple of months just story after story after story after story in the media about illegal aliens committing heinous crimes, rapes, murders, arson, kidnapping, crimes of violence against not just U.S. citizens, but against people in migrant communities. So this is not a us-them issue. This is a general public safety issue. And what we have is a direct correlation. Now, as I mentioned in the article, correlation is not always evidence of causation. But here, you would really have to be mathematically deficient and skilled at ignoring the obvious to say that, oh, no, there's no evidence that migrants commit crime at higher rates than anyone else. And, those arguments made by Cato and these other organizations never really held a lot of water to begin with, because they're ignoring the fact that if you're an illegal alien, you had to commit a crime to come to the United States. And generally speaking, you wind up committing a number of fraud crimes in order to work here unlawfully, open a bank account, and do all the things that Americans legally do every day without breaking any laws.
I remember vividly visiting New York multiple times during the Giuliani reign there, and it was the kind of place you could take young children on a vacation to Manhattan and walk the streets, even in the dark at night. It was so safe. And now contrast that with, you cite this in your Fox News piece, robberies in the Big Apple are up 300%. They say the increase is directly attributable to the mass influx of illegal aliens who have been treated to luxury hotels at taxpayer expense while they rob, I'm going to say that word, S-A, and pillage their way through the 5 boroughs. So we've gone complete 180 from the Giuliani era, and it's like Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome there now.
Yeah, it's crazy because they've done exactly the opposite. If you bring in people who are lawbreakers by nature and broke the law to come here, and I'm sure you have a lot of people in the anti-borders contingent going, well, they didn't really break the law. Joe Biden invited them. Well, Joe Biden doesn't make the immigration law. He's responsible for enforcing it. The Congress of the United States makes the immigration laws. And what you had was an entire administration say to people, yeah, if you break the law, you're going to get away with it. That sends a message to people that they can break any law that they want and get away with it. And then you reward them for their bad behavior by giving them debit cards preloaded with cash, lodging in luxury hotels, food at taxpayer expense. I mean, if you wanted to break down a society and bring it to that Mad Max Beyond the Thunderdome stage, you couldn't have followed a better blueprint than they did in New York as far as welcoming the so-called migrants and then not holding them accountable for their bad behavior. I believe the Venezuelan young man who shot at the police officers when they were trying to pull him over for riding an unregistered motor scooter was out without bail the very next day. And what kind of a message does that send?
Yeah. Now a lot of these apologists on the anti-border side will come up with any excuse to defend this behavior, and they'll say, well, they're from poor countries, and they're destitute, and they're desperate, and anything to justify it. But what we've seen from the reporting, particularly the New York Post has been one of the best sources to tell the truth about this. You've got these gangs that originated in Latin America that are here now. They're in Manhattan. I believe Tren de Aragua is the big one up there.
Yeah, the Venezuelan one.
They are now using these luxury hotels as recruiting hotbeds to get new soldiers in their gangs. They're getting these Vespas, these motor scooters, robbing people of their cell phones in broad daylight, taking the financial data off the phones, cleaning out the accounts, selling the phones back home in Latin America. This is not just a random act of criminality here and there. We're talking about, they're establishing criminal empires there as a result of this.
Yeah, of course. And the Venezuelan government, which is 100% diehard Marxist and hates the United States, I mean, generally speaking, street gangs composed of kids are not particularly adept at jailbreaking phones, stealing financial data, and then making the phones usable by end-user consumers in Latin America. So it makes you wonder, is the Venezuelan intelligence service involved in this, or is the Venezuelan intelligence service acting as a proxy for another intelligence service? I mean, the places where this could go wrong, from organized crime involvement to foreign government involvement, is crazy. And the other thing is, we knew this was going to happen. This has happened before. This happened during the Mariel boat lift, when the Cuban alleged refugees were coming here, and Castro emptied the jails and sent all those folks to the United States. Anybody who's ever seen Scarface will be familiar with that story.
How many modern versions of Tony Montana have come through as a result of all this? And we're seeing it right now.
Well, apparently like 300% of them in New York. I mean,
it's unbelievable. So you mentioned the Venezuelans. We talked about that. That leads to the next thing. There was an article in Daily Signal recently. Venezuela is exporting violent crime problem to U.S. So this has been in the political bloodstream of this country lately, that prisons in these Latin countries are being emptied out. And then, of course, the people here say, oh, well, that's not true. They're not doing that. Here's a little citation from this story. Venezuela's rate of violent deaths dropped to its lowest level in more than 2 decades following years of massive migration as both criminals and victims fled the nation's economic crisis. So their crime rates are going down. They're sending all these people. Our crime rates are going up. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what's going on here.
Well, and here's the interesting thing. The crime rates in a lot of these countries have been going down for years because the U.S. spends millions upon millions of taxpayer dollars on what's called OPDAT, which is the Department of Justice's overseas prosecutorial assistance and training program. And so they go into countries all over the world, not just Latin America, but we spend a lot of money in Latin America, and they train police officers and prosecutors. They fight corruption. They encourage prosecutors to actually pursue charges against people. They have special programs for violence against women. So to begin with, the claims about gang violence and domestic violence these people are making in support of their asylum claims are absurd. But then it also appears that the governments in a lot of these countries are driving their crime rates even lower by emptying their jails and by politely encouraging any known criminals who haven't been put in jail to flee the country and head to the United States. And this is part of an ongoing problem that the U.S. has had with regard to Latin America and the Caribbean basin. The countries in those regions have for years said, well, you keep deporting all these people back here who are criminals, and they engage in criminal behavior. And the U.S. government goes, well, they're your citizens. You have an international law obligation to take them. And then they say, oh, well, some of these people, went to the United States as children and were criminalized and trained as criminals in the United States, and now we have to deal with them. Which, of course, is a silly argument because there's no guarantee that those people wouldn't have become criminals in their own country. Criminal behavior usually starts to manifest itself early and tends to be based on personality characteristics. So generally speaking, if somebody was going to be a criminal, they were going to be a criminal no matter where they were. And why is this the United States problem? If somebody was allowed to live in the United States, which is a law and order country with free public education and free assistance for people, and they still become a criminal, it's our responsibility to cure that person of their criminal tendencies when they're a foreign national who's never become a U.S. citizen. And it's just the arguments with all this stuff are beyond absurd. They don't make any sense. And I think that has been used as a political justification in Latin America by a lot of the leaders down there for doing this. And this is where we're going to get back at the junkies to the north, and they can have all our criminals because they can deal with them.
So, Matt, to tie this discussion in a bow, despite the protestations of these inside the Beltway Chamber of Commerce friendly think tanks that tell us of the limited connection between illegal immigration and crime, I think we've shown here that there is a very significant connection, and it's gotten exponentially worse the last few years. What are your final thoughts on what do we do here?
Well, I think it's definitely getting worse. I think you'd have to be blind not to see it. And, the question is now, what's going to be done about it? Because if this keeps going on, eventually the U.S. is going to look like the Wild West. And you're going to have too many bad hombres and not enough people in a position to do anything about it. Hopefully the tide is changing. Even a lot of the sanctuary cities seem to be losing patience with this. They're realizing it's costing them money. It's costing them votes. I think a lot of the empty virtue signaling behavior may have been cured by all of this. But the fact is that if you want the rule of law to prevail in your country, then it has to start with a border, because the border is what determines what law prevails and where it prevails. And if you just erase the border, then that kicks one of the three legs out from under the stool, and the whole rule of law situation starts to degrade and fall apart to the point where you can lose control. And that can happen either from people coming in, or it can happen like some of the things that we saw during the pandemic with violent protests throughout the United States. God forbid you have both of those things happen at once. So it's very simple. No border, no country. We need to reestablish the border if we want to save our country.